Now, without any further delay, let's begin today's event, Transforming Security and Experience with Digital Identity, sponsored by Onfido and hosted by American Banker. I would like to introduce your moderator for today, and that is Mike Fisk. Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and I'd like to welcome the audience once again. We are very grateful that you have chosen to share some of your busy day with us. We know that your time is valuable, and we will honor that today with what I'm confident will be an engaging 60 minutes or so of discussion. Once again, our topic today is Transforming Security and Experience with Digital Identity. And my name is Mike Sisk. I will be your moderator today. I'm a contributing editor at American Banker, and my articles have also appeared in Barron's, Crane's New York Business, Inc., Institutional Investor, Strategy and Business, and Worth. And I am very, very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Diego Mejia, VP of Financial Services at Onfido. Diego is an accomplished senior executive with more than 18 years of experience in the identity space. Throughout his career, he has held various leadership positions, including Director of Healthcare Sales at SecureAuth Corporation, and currently he is an identity management expert focusing on digital banking at Onfido. And just before I turn things over to Diego, I wanted to reiterate one quick thing that Jessica mentioned, and that is we do have time at the end for Q&A, and we encourage you to get those questions into the queue throughout the hour as they occur to you. And if we run out of time and we don't get to your question that you've posed in the console, we will definitely follow up after the program. So your voice will be heard. We very much want to hear from you, so please ask away. And with that, I think I will officially turn things over to Diego to get the ball rolling here. Diego, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike. Greatly appreciate that. And thanks, everyone, for joining, of course. Very, very grateful to have opportunity. Going to present about 25 minutes of content talking about what's been happening in the digitalization of the financial industry and how, of course, digital identity is a key component that should be and needs to be figured out. Where, of course, is where Onfido specializes in. So to go into it, very, very simple, and I know many of us have been talking about the effects of the pandemic. We've talked about how in 2020 the world has gone as digital as possible. This phenomenon is kind of interesting because those that were already there or have been saying or already transforming their business, their philosophies and their ideas that business and much of the world can be delivered digitally. And then also those that were a bit slower perhaps to adopt some of these digital efforts finally realized that, yes, they're moving into that digital world, which, of course, at that point, it stresses one component that once you're going to now deliver your business entirely digitally, you're going to have to figure out how to better engage with your consumers. And that word consumer engagement begins to take on several different definitions when we start talking about both security and that consumer experience. Since you will no longer be able to face-to-face see your consumer, that ushers in a number of big questions. How do you trust them? How do they trust you? How do you better communicate with them or not? I think foundational to that is for every firm to have the proper digital strategy. Now, that greater digital strategy level really brings in a number of different technologies, most notable of which, and why we're gathered today, is how to figure out that digital identity when that consumer now becomes fully anonymous.
Hey, Diego?
Yes, can you hear it?
I don't mean to break in. We can hear you loud and clear, but your video froze. So could you just refresh your browser? It'll just disconnect you for a moment, but I'm sure everyone would love to see you live action. Diego will be back with us in just a moment.
Am I back?
You're back. Wonderful.
Okay, excellent. Oh, my own vanity is getting in the way. I'd rather not have the camera on, but that's okay. We'll go with the camera, no problem. So as I was mentioning, once the world goes digital and companies focus on the engagement of the consumer, several natural barriers come up. And one of the key ones is drop-off. Drop-off is a lot of what we at Onfido work with our consumers on, because now the importance, and in many respects, becomes around how do we push our consumers through digital channels how do we make sure that our digital channels are robust enough and reaching out the biggest segments of the market? In many respects, it's actually more important than potentially fraud, because it is key, of course, to drive as much traffic as you can through that. So some of the normal issues that we come across is that the experience to onboard with a digital bank was perhaps poor, and then that allowed the consumer to go away. Many of the consumers didn't feel secure, didn't see enough security features in their engagement that would allow them the confidence to engage digitally. And many of them may have actually onboarded. However, the services that were being provided were so limited, there was really no value for that consumer to move over to that digital product, when in fact they can continue to do what they were doing before and gain more value out of that. So these are some of the things that we sit with our customers and try and figure out, is how to gain the greatest level of adoption of those digital efforts, how to offer as many services as possible through these digital channels, and how to communicate a sense of confidence back to the consumer that both their privacy, their data, and of course their money is going to be well protected. And this slide is interesting because I think there are several factors that are complicit in seeing a rise in some of the fraud. What I believe a lot of that, and a lot of us here at Onfido believe, is that the rise in fraud is due not simply to business being delivered online, but also the fact that many firms rush to deliver their business online without the proper tools in place or without the proper strategy in place. So this is kind of an amalgamation of several things. Rushing out without the proper security and proper identity component in place is going to actually present a vector for fraud. And that's why we saw an increase in that fraud. Some of the customers that we've recently been able to help, a lot of it was, hey, they stood up a digital channel, they stood up an onboarding. However, they were erring in the side of just letting anybody through their digital channel. It wasn't really a robust, well-established digital identity. It was very reactive to what was happening at the time of COVID. So we've been engaging with them to give them the opportunity to say, okay, now that we want to be able to slow down and make sure you have the proper digital identity strategy in place so that you can close up some of those fraud vectors, and then you can put better components in place of how you're going to improve your engagement with your consumers. And of course, changing working hours 24/7, we're all very familiar with that with the pandemic. This, of course, is now creating that engagement model, right? And then also making sure that your security strategy is a 24/7 ongoing component to where you can deliver your business at any point, be prepared for any sort of issue that you may have from a security standpoint. Now, what kind of challenges came about because of the digitalization of business? Normally, when you get a transformation into new digital channels, you're going to run across some very natural barriers. One of the main barriers, of course, is your current infrastructure, the current tools that you're using. Quite often, you're going to find that those tools and that infrastructure that you've built for several years cannot keep pace for what you need to do in a digital world. So that's a big puzzle that we try and help our customers figure out with. How are you going to leverage your legacy tools and then transform, and as you transform the delivery of your business, how are those legacy tools either going to be incorporated in your new strategies or replaced into your new strategies? The other component, of course, is figuring out the identity. How does the identity now play into this digital engagement? Are your regulation strategies somehow being disrupted? We quite often help customers that have a global reach. So understanding regulations in different countries is paramount to delivering their business digitally. And then, of course, and I think most critical, as I've been mentioning before, is how do you create the right experience? How do you then make your product and your services that much better from your competitors? What are you allowing your consumers to do on your digital app? And is that enough of an engagement where more of the market will be driven over to you because you figured out how to provide a better service digitally? Now, where was the struggle that Onfido helped to solve? One of the issues, and what I mentioned before on the previous slide, that why a lot of the fraud attempts were increased, a lot of the old infrastructure was still in place. And when I refer to the infrastructure, it's the infrastructure on how to verify and establish a real identity. So as I mentioned, some of these companies went out strategies and did not have the proper digital identity strategy in place. Why is that? Well, they were still using some of the old methods, and many of you in banking are quite familiar with it, on how we identify a consumer. We use the old standards of making a call to the credit report, to Experian, even trusting a social media account. What you had is a situation where companies were trusting what we call weak signals, weak data that's given you very either corrupted, because a lot of the identities, a lot of the social, even the social security numbers, these are data that are very much available in the black market. So you're actually leveraging what is dirty data, if you will, to help identify your consumers. Just by conception there, that is a flawed model to be able to do. So a lot of these businesses were trying to sign up people with Experian, your social security number, give us your Gmail account, what effectively becomes a weak trust of data to use. Secondly, of course, if you weren't using that, then you were using some of the traditional methods. We're going to have you sign up by calling in. We're going to verify you manually. It's going to take 3 or 4 days, or potentially even 2 to 3 hours to verify your identity before we can offer you services. As you can imagine, in a digital world, with the expectations that we as consumers have, that's not going to improve engagement with me. I'm one of the biggest online consumers out there. My expectation is that I should be able to do just about everything from my mobile phone, and I want it at a point and click. Trying to verify somebody's identity over the course of 2 hours or even over the course of 3 days is really a non-starter if we're trying to create new digital channels and move into that greater digital world. So these are the problems that we quite often work with our current customers right now. I think the best way to encapsulate this is that our customers that are still doing these methods are operationally inefficient. They frankly cannot keep pace with what is needed to deliver their business digitally. So we put in efforts to make sure that we are accelerating this step of not only being able to verify an identity much quicker, but also doing it with sounder data, with greater levels of security, so that now you can found your digital strategies on a real identity, as opposed to allowing somebody to sign up with their Facebook account, for example. So here's the big problem, and here's the area that we try to focus very strongly on at Onfido, is how do you deal with somebody that effectively is anonymous the first time they come to you, right? How do you know who you're really dealing with? Well, really, the approach is, let's make sure you have the proper digital identity in place. And let's make sure that that digital identity and how you try and verify that identity has 2 key components. One is engagement, making sure you can improve engagement with that digital identity. And secondly, making sure that the fraud vector has been protected, giving you high confidence that you're dealing with the proper human, with the real human, placing all the security components around that person, and then, of course, leveraging that component to better engage with that person. And talk about here, I should say, and we communicate with our customers quite heavily, is we say, listen, we're giving you the opportunity to allow you to see your consumers as people and not passwords and not data, right? And more critically, not data that is easily manipulated. What we really are allowing you to do is see your consumer as a real person, which will then allow you and them to have the great degree of security, and then, of course, open the channel to improve your engagement with them. So how do we do this? So bringing it down a little bit of how Onfido works, well, what we like to do, and as we mentioned here, is anchor an identity in a real identity. And how do we do this? Well, we would do this no differently than you would show up somewhere, even if you're pulled over by a police officer. What does that police officer usually ask you? Well, how do you prove your identity? You simply grab your driver's license and you prove who you are. Usually that police officer will take a look at the driver's license and then take a look at you and try and make a biometric match of you. It's exactly what we do. So we leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning to first evaluate a government-issued ID, making sure that that ID hasn't been manipulated in any way, making sure that it is a real ID. And then secondly, we ask for a selfie or a video, depending on which way you would like to go, to make of the person in the video and the picture on that government-issued ID. Once we've done that, we've established two things. First, that ID is real. It hasn't been manipulated. And secondly, at the time of registration or at the time of action, I'll explain that down the line, that person matches that ID. That means that person is the owner of that ID. So we've gone well beyond allowing you to sign up with a Facebook account. We've actually gone to the point of saying we have a verifiable, proved data point of a government-issued ID and a biometric match that now lets you know, yes, this consumer is a viable person.
Hey,
now,
Diego.
what's the long-term value? So one of the things, and this goes back to some of the customers that we talked about, making sure that they have the right identity strategy in place is, did I freeze? Am I back?
Yeah. Hey, Diego. Hey, Diego.
Yes.
You are back, but I think we missed most of what you said about this slide. So you might want to just start again on this slide.
Okay, very well. So what we want to communicate on this slide is the importance of the life cycle of an identity. Much of what we discuss with a customer, and quite naturally, when we first engage with a customer, they find out how we help them with onboarding their consumers, how we help them at registration. What we then later talk to them about is the power of having a real identity in place at onboarding. Once you do that, at what other points in that life cycle can you reintroduce or re-verify, if you will, that identity to do two things? To give you a greater degree of confidence that you are dealing with the right human, a real human, and secondly, that you can improve points of engagement with that consumer. And that's something we'll talk about here in one of the later slides. So what we look at is really studying it from that entire life cycle, not just at onboarding. So other places that we like to provide on FIDO is at high risk transactions. So something like a forgotten password, account lockout. How can I regain my account? There's also, as I call, the right to forget. So those of you that have some experience in the identity world know the vast importance of that right to forget, especially as we see not only GDPR in Europe, but here in the United States, particularly I'm in California, we see GDPR's younger brother, which is CCPA, which is effectively I can call in to the service provider and tell that service provider that they must delete all data about me. Well, how do we know it really is Diego? How do we know it's Diego, our customer, that's making that request? So quite often what we're able to provide our consumers is that ability to come back with a re-verification. And then, of course, at that re-verification, we establish it in a very simple, easy to use way. Quite frankly, ways that are quicker and simpler to use than your modern authentication methods. Some of our customers have deployed an ability for you to reset your password, unlock your account, or close your account with a simple selfie. So at this point, since you've seen me at onboarding, I can provide a selfie to reset my password. I can provide that selfie to unlock my account and go back into the transaction. Or for greater protection, I would love it if my own personal bank, once I would make a transfer of X amount of dollars, would say, hey, Diego, quick selfie, and that transfer can go through. That is an example of some of the improved engagement that we're able to provide our consumers. Now, full extended value. And I want to come back to that real identity concept. So as I said earlier, now that you know it's really Diego, now that you've seen my driver's license and you have a semblance of me, quite a bit of opportunity. We often work with a lot of marketing teams. There are demographic information that can be used and now is verifiable information that a lot of marketing teams that our customers will use. And how is that valuable? Well, understanding early demographics about me at the beginning, at the onboarding stage, optimizes how marketing engage with me as a consumer. Quite often, of course, since we deal with a lot of financial services, they have multiple lines of business. And what we often come across, many of my more traditional financial service customers will have very monolithic architectures, or they have very disparate systems where a customer either exists in triplicate under 3 different identities, or if I'm a brand new consumer, I'm coming on, but I have to sign up into each different line of business. For years, even when I was in healthcare only, I always heard about this approach of trying to create an omni-channel with the consumers. One of the things that I like to remind all of our customers is, if an omni-channel is the goal, then customer centricity is imperative. Ergo, you gotta be sure that that's your real consumer. And once you have that level of certainty, well, then now what are the possibilities? This ability then, if I sign on, and let's say that you are a challenger bank, I've signed on to your services, can you now provide me lending service? Can you now connect me back over to your department for wealth management? And so as you see, your ability to service me is a lot better. And so the engagement has increased simply because you took the proper identity strategy at the beginning of verifying my identity and having the high confidence that, yeah, that is really Diego. Our fraud vector right here is extremely low. Let's now leverage this real identity to properly offer him greater services that can be delivered. Now, one of the things I hope that the team walk away from is the high importance of security, of course, but really I often say you can be as secure as possible, but really it's adoption, right? If I create a bank and I'm creating a new mobile app, my goal as a business unit is to drive as much traffic through. We want the right traffic, we want to abide by regulation, but for me, I want the greatest market share. One of the components that we spend a lot of effort on is understanding how do we allow our banking institutions to drive as many humans through and allowing those humans to transact as best as possible. So a lot of the efforts behind Onfido's machine learning and artificial intelligence technology is to give you a high degree of accessibility. We are, of the identity verification vendors, we are one that really focuses on reducing ethnicity bias. One of the components that's key about Onfido is that globally we have 9 different offices. We are in 195 different countries we support. We verify over 4,000 documents. Now, why that is important is because these documents are feeding our machine learning engines. It is giving us the understanding and the expertise of being able to identify an array of humans, which then can be leveraged by our customers as having higher fidelity of being able to identify people north or south of the equator, which is a natural area that needs to be improved in this identity verification world. That's something that Onfido spends a lot of efforts on to make sure that we're giving our customers the greatest ability to capture as much of the market as possible. So that's why you'll see here on the slide that we have those global documents coverage, that inclusivity, the anti-bias of the algorithms, a lot of effort. We have dedicated teams to make sure that we are doing the best possible to identify all types of faces. So lastly, what I do want to leave you with is that strategic imperative. As I mentioned before, fraud was up, yes, because things were now being delivered more digitally, but also because people went to market without the proper strategy in place. What should that strategy always entail? It should always have security in mind, but that security needs to be at a point of friction that's best defined by each customer. And secondly, the proper user experience needs to be put in place. What we often saw is when things were too friction, too locked down, the business reacted by opening things up, which of course raised the security profile. So understanding what the proper balance of user experience and secure identity strategy is paramount. That's my presentation for today. I do note that we have some questions. So Mike, if I could please defer to you. Go for it. Hopefully they're not too hard.
Absolutely. Yes. Good. And just a reminder, if anybody's got something on their mind, now would definitely be the time to get that question into the queue. But we do have some good ones here, so let's just jump right in. So first one, Diego, what about journeys not started on mobile?
So good question. So we talked about that ability for adoption. Not everybody uses a mobile app. I'm actually one of those that, I don't want to download yet another app. Of course, if it's going to be a banking app, I will download it on my mobile phone. But Onfido offers the same functionality whether you are able to have a native mobile app or whether your efforts are based, right? So it doesn't matter to us if you're on a laptop or if you're on a mobile app. Onfido is able to provide its services on both.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Will the end of the pandemic mean a return to previous behavior?
A return to previous behavior. I would say no. I would say what you're going to see is quite typically there will be your detractors or those companies that say, okay, this is a bit too much work, that will attempt to perhaps roll back. So in some cases, you might see a hybrid of the behavior. However, most of it is going to be leveraging and how to leverage these new digital channels. I think it's quite obvious, even when we're seeing things, typical industries that really are late adopters and late coming to the table, like healthcare, we see even them do a full digital engagement for a doctor visit. Thinking about that, no, the world has changed enough to where you're, at worst, a hybrid, but you're mostly going to see a fully digitized engagement in some capacity.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Next one here. How do you ensure the submitted IDs are genuine?
Very good question. So a couple components that I mentioned earlier. One of them is that we leverage artificial intelligence as well as machine learning to give us that high fidelity and that understanding of whether that ID has been manipulated or not. Second component, and this is an advantage to Onfido, is that we mix the humans with are on the line of particular technological talents will know that machine learning is by no way infallible. Onfido is we have a pristine way of mixing the technology behind machine learning and kind of bolstering that with human reviewers. So in those fringe cases, in those cases where the machine learning engine isn't able to make a decision, it is kicked over to a human to make a final evaluation. So we have very well-trained, very expert people that are able to evaluate a document, check it for its validity, and then be able to give you a final result of whether there is suspected fraud in a document or not. Additionally, we have relationships with Interpol, various relationships with various different governments, where we get to see the templates of some of these documents and become educated on what is the real template as opposed to what are potential fraud templates. So that's how we're able to give you high certainty that's genuine.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Diego. All right. Do you envision a world with no in-person customer interaction?
I hope not. That would make it really hard. I want to keep that human touch. Trust me, stuck in this pandemic, I want to get out as much as possible. But I would say no. What you're going to see, and those of us that were alive in the 80s, we saw that transformation of help desk calls from a human to a bot, right? And I think, like me, all of us were a bit frustrated by that. And the reason we were frustrated by that is because those methods, I hated having to push one if you need this, push two if you need that. I think what we have an opportunity of doing now is when we deliver this type of technology is getting it right. And what I mean by getting it right is, and I often say this should be like Secret Service, right? The Secret Service is very important to the president. Secret Service should not be seen until it has to be seen for some sort of reason. So what we want to do is create the proper consumer engagement models, create the proper consumer engagement through digital channels that whenever that breaks down, they'll have the ability then to rectify by being in person. So I'm perfectly fine working through my Bank of America app. I love it, right? But as soon as something is wrong, I reserve as a consumer the right to then be directed to that human interaction. I think the banks that are going to figure this out that proper way are the ones that will win in the end. For me to have that ability to say, okay, something has gone awry, I need to have that option of going to fulfill this in a person-to-person interaction. Of course, what we want for business delivery reasons, for operationally efficient reasons, is to keep me transacting digitally 90% of the time. But I think to treat me as a proper human, you still got to reserve the right for me to be able to engage with you in person if that needs to be the case. Hopefully that answered that.
Definitely. I think that's a good note to wrap up on, actually. I want to thank Diego very much for being here. Really insights, good to have you. And I wanted to thank everyone in the audience, of course, for being here as well. We would not want to do it without you. So thank you for being here, asking those questions. And as I said, if you asked a question we didn't get to, we will definitely be following up. So thank you for getting that question into the queue. And also, please keep an eye out, because we'll be sending a follow-up email the next day or two that will have a recording of this event, as well as there'll be a link to the slides as well. So you can kind of dig into this, all this great content at your leisure, and we encourage you to do that. And I think with that, I will officially wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.